I think we'll go ahead and switch to our next topic, which is those common controls. So again, as we're looking at how we can accomplish this, we did build this out, with a plan in mind. Edwin mentioned that we are confident that there is the technical capabilities in place for these organizations to make this happen. But that is primarily on the security and incident identification side, right? So XDR, EDR, et cetera. On the actual recovery and overall resilience side of things, there are best practices that are rapidly rolling out, not only in community efforts and vendor efforts proactively, but also now showing up in these regulatory compliance requirements. And this is where the Veeam team has a chance to shine, right? We have been preparing and working on this and messaging these kinds of features out to the community. So to have this kind of conversation, I previously chatted with two folks from our product strategy enterprise team, specifically Jeff Reichart, who is our VP of enterprise strategy, and Brad Lynch, our director of enterprise strategy, to talk a bit about what we've been paying attention to in the common controls area, right? Commonly across these regulatory changes, what controls are we looking at? And then also, how is the Veeam team contextualizing all of that around zero trust? Before we cut over to my fun interviews, I'll go ahead and put this poll question in the chat and we'll chat a bit more. Which common controls around zero trust, and again, we'll explain what we mean by zero trust in a minute, does your organization have in place today? For example, immutable storage. You've heard the Veeam team talk about immutable storage. Hopefully you've seen that we have a brand new solution called Veeam Vault to get you guys set up and running. But there are lots of other concepts within zero trust that we want to make sure the community knows about when it comes to controls. So to do that, I had a conversation with Jeff and Brad. Here's a little bit about from that conversation.
That's exactly right, Leah. What we're seeing is increasingly a convergence of controls that organizations of all kinds are being asked to comply with. Now, it used to be, I don't know about you, Brad, but I've worked a lot with DoD entities. I've worked a lot with highly regulated organizations. And it used to be that you had to look in those areas to find organizations that really had a good grasp on the controls that they needed around security. But increasingly, what we're seeing with things like the cybersecurity framework, with things like zero trust architectures, with requirements around reporting and security in things like DORA and NIS2, and the Troscianecki Act that's going to come into effect this year, is that all kinds of organizations are getting asked to do certain things. We've also seen it from the cybersecurity or the cyber insurance side. I know I talked with a Lloyd's reinsurer several years ago who said they had found even 4 years ago that claim sizes decreased by 85% if the insured had multi-factor authentication, had immutable backups, and had incident response plans that they actually tested. I think you've seen a lot of the same, right, Brad?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. I mean, so much of it can just come down to basic due diligence. I mean, your point about MFA, I think it was in Microsoft's Defender report that they saw 99% of attacks were thwarted by simple MFA, right? So much of this can just be kind of coming down to the basics and basic best practices. And, that's what these compliance organizations are out there to have your best interests at heart.
One of the other controls, if you can call it that we're seeing a lot in regulations that are coming out now are reporting mandates. We saw that from the SEC for publicly traded organizations here in the United States a couple of years ago, but now it is increasingly common to see organizations have 72 hours to report if a covered incident happens, and as short a time as 24 hours to report if they make a ransomware payment. Both of those specific requirements are part of the Troscianecki Act here in the United States. So that kind of, it's not really a technical control, but it's a control that's going to drive a lot of behavior in all kinds of organizations.
I think some of these requirements also combine with folks in the data resilience, cyber resilience industry, but also the regulations themselves are a big reason why we're seeing the lowest payment rate in history, right? Ever since ransomware started, not only validated by Cobra incident response, but also chain analysis confirmed this as well. They saw the lowest level of payment rate that they've ever seen, and that's attributed to the fact that if I have to report it anyways, then I'm not going to pay to hide my shame. And combined with the fact that the technology itself, us, many other players in our industry, have really upped their game from a resilience perspective in the services and capabilities offered to our clients.
Awesome. So obviously, really two experts in their fields. And again, you can follow both of them on social media. You can drop questions in the chat. We'll make sure that Jeff and Brad get those if you have them. But you can really hear thematically some of these big changes, right? This idea of hardening infrastructure, looking at the architecture, figuring out what capabilities need to be in place in order to meet these kinds of requirements. And I made sure to have a chat with the same group, Brad and Jeff again, to talk a bit about some of these specific recommendations that you all can take back as a community to focus on within the maturity of your resilience strategy. So let's go ahead and see what they had to say.
So, Brad, we just touched on this, but could you unpack what a few of the specific technical controls that we're seeing regulations and cyber insurers and all kinds of frameworks ask for from organizations now?
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. I mean, what really comes down to these core 5 principles in my mind, right? Immutability, defense in depth, system resilience, proactive validation, and none of that really matters if it's not simple to use. But when you look at this, starting all the way at the top, which I'd say is most important, is immutability. I mean, at the end of the day, if you have an immutable backup you can leverage, you're in that much better of a position, whether it's your primary or your offsite backup. We actually have a ransomware support SWAT team, and we don't have a case documented where we weren't able to help a client recover data when they had an immutable backup. And then going down the list here, right, when you look at defense in depth, of course, you're going to have your traditional security tools like your Palo Altos, your CrowdStrikes, your Splunks, the list goes on and on in terms of EDR, XDR tools. But there's no reason why you can't have additional detection capabilities, prevention capabilities, in case they miss something. We've seen several cases where we've actually been able to detect something that got missed. And then system resilience, right? So when you look at having durability and availability, this is so critical, not just being able to recover from your backups, but being able to recover from multiple sources, multiple platforms, so that when you go to your last resort, you're able to trust that to come back online as fast as possible. And then, actually validating that. So going into CISA's guidance, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, I mean, this is one of their #1 recommendations. It's also COBRA, the incident response movement, it's their #1 recommendation to actually test that your plans are actually going to work, and not just test for the traditional DR scenarios, but test for an actual cyber recovery scenario. And do you know that not just your VMs are going to come online, but your applications are going to come online. They're going to communicate with each other in the way that you expect. And so that when that incident strikes, within just a few clicks, you have a plan in place that you're able to take action on, and you feel confident that that's going to work. And then this last piece here, right? All of this really doesn't mean anything if you feel like you can't do it in an operational way that's simple, right? So having all these components is critical, but being able to do it in a way that doesn't require professional services, doesn't require scripting, doesn't require all these additional resources to make work is what's most important.
Yeah, completely agree. That last point is one. I was actually out in San Diego last week talking with some Veeam Navy customers. And every time that I talk with our Navy customers, I hear the sailors love Veeam because it's straightforward to use. They can get trained on it very quickly. And like all of our customers, these folks don't have just one thing to do, right? They're busy people. And so operational simplicity is really, really important across the board.
Awesome. So hopefully you all enjoyed a lot of those specific best practices that we're recommending. And then also Jeff's color commentary around working with the US Navy. If you haven't heard about that before, we released a press release a few years ago about working with the Navy. And, when we think about critical missions, something like the Navy, we want to make sure that they have what they need to be successful.